Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the nerd on the street, and today we are setting up a Jitsi Meet server. Okay guys, so with the current coronavirus pandemic, people are using their computers to chat more than they probably do on a regular basis. And an application called Zoom has become incredibly popular in the past couple of weeks. I have seen it all over the place. I have helped a ton of people get it running on their computers. I've seen family members and friends using it. I know people who are going to schools that are requiring students now to use Zoom to attend classes. Personally, I didn't realize Zoom was so popular. I thought it was kind of an off-brand WebEx. That was the impression I got at the enterprise job that I used it at myself a while ago. But now that so many people are stuck at home and they're still wanting to converse, not just one-on-one but in groups, they're using Zoom to do that. Now, Zoom has a couple of big issues. For one thing, first and foremost, Zoom is not end-to-end encrypted. It is only transport encrypted. That means that your video that you're sharing with other people in your call, it is encrypted between you and Zoom's server, so your internet service provider cannot see your video. But then once the video gets to Zoom's server, it is decrypted there, Zoom can see it, and then it's encrypted again before it's sent to the other parties in your call. So that means that the people working at Zoom have the ability to see your video, to save it, record it, do whatever they want with it. Legally, they've got terms that say what they will and won't do, but from a technical standpoint, they have the ability to do that. So that right there means that a ton of people are currently streaming themselves in a way that is visible by this company. And on top of that, I saw a news report that honestly I just considered kind of funny that was reporting on an incident where Zoom calls between two parties in North America within the United States were being routed through China. So you were having your video call encrypted, sent to a Zoom server in China, decrypted there, and then re-encrypted and sent back into the United States. So now we're crossing borders, which means the NSA is probably collecting more data. It's encrypted at the border, so that's okay, but then the data was also being decrypted within China. Now, I'm not enraged about that or anything, but some people were, and it just kind of shows what can happen if so many people are putting their eggs in a single company's basket. So instead of using Zoom, what you can do is use an open source alternative such as Jitsi Meet. Now, Jitsi works similarly to Zoom, where your call is encrypted in transport, but it is decrypted on the server. It uses WebRTC, so there's no application you have to install. You can use Jitsi from within any major web browser. And even though the data is still decrypted on the server, the big difference with Jitsi is because it's open source, you can host your own server. You don't have to have a single company like Zoom hosting everybody's servers. So if you want to have a birthday party or some gathering, with multiple people, you can set your own Jitsi server up and the communication is encrypted between everybody and your server. And since you control the server, that means there is no third party who could potentially be looking at what you're doing. Now, the easiest way to use Jitsi Meet is actually just to use their public instance. You can go to meet.jit.c and you can create a Jitsi room. But if you do that, you're using the public Jitsi server that is hosted by 8x8, the company who currently owns Jitsi. If you're wanting to move away from Zoom into an open source solution, you're probably going to want to control the server yourself. And it's very easy to set one up. We're going to cut to the desktop right now and I'll show you how it's done. Alright guys, and here we are on the desktop. So for today's video, I am going to be using a DigitalOcean droplet. This is basically a server that I'm going to be temporarily renting from DigitalOcean. If you're wanting 100% control over your server, you might want to host your own server instead of using a rented server like this one, because in this instance, DigitalOcean could theoretically still see the decrypted data when it's on the server. However, I still trust a company that I'm paying $5 a month to more than a company who's giving me something for free. So I still think that even if you're using something like DigitalOcean or Linode, it is an advantage over using Zoom. We're going to set our Jitsi server up on Debian 10. The instructions should be almost exactly the same if you're using Ubuntu 18.04. We'll go with the standard plan here with 1 GB of RAM. For our region, we get to pick exactly which data center our droplet is going to be in. So when you use Zoom, their program is going to use algorithms to determine which of Zoom's servers and in what location your data is passing through. When you're using your own server, another advantage is you're choosing where it geographically goes. And if I was actually hosting a Jitsi server for myself, I would probably put it up on Linode instead of DigitalOcean, because Linode has data centers in Georgia and Texas, which are places I would rather have my data going than New York or California, as somebody who grew up and lives in the Midwest. But I'll stick with New York for now. We're not going to turn on IPv6 for this server. If everybody in the world tried to host their own Jitsi server, then IPv6 might be necessary, but I have never had a case so far where DigitalOcean has run out of their IPv4 addresses for their droplets. I'm going to add my SSH key. That way I don't have to use a password to log into this server. I've already got a video about setting up SSH keys, so you can watch that if you don't have that set up yet, or you can always just use a one-time root password as well. And for our host name here, the Jitsi package that we're going to install is going to need to know what domain name we're using. So I'm actually going to put the host name as jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. And when we're done here, we'll be able to go to jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com to start a video chat. So we're going to put the fully qualified domain name in here as our host name, and I'll go ahead and create that droplet. I'm also going to pull up my DNS control panel here because we will need to actually add an A record for jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. So the host name will be Jitsi, the IP address we'll get from our droplet here. I'll go ahead and copy this IP address, I'll paste it in. I'm going to lower the time to live, and we'll save that. The only reason I'm lowering the time to live is because this is a temporary server. I'll be taking it down later, so I don't want that record to stick around after I'm done with it. Now at this point, I need to wait for this DNS record to actually propagate. Since I saved this in my DNS control panel, it's going to take some time to get copied into all of Linode's servers and then copied into everyone else's DNS servers. If I come here and do a dig on jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com, we can see it has not propagated yet. This is not the IP address that we're wanting. The IP address we're wanting is this 161 address. We've got a 50 dot address right now, which is my main web server. So we will just wait for this DNS record to propagate. As soon as that updates, we'll resume. And if you don't feel like sitting here and waiting for your DNS record to propagate in real time, if you just wait a couple hours, that's usually all it takes. All right, guys, so as you can see, this DNS record has propagated. We are receiving our new IP address now when we look for jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. So now we can go ahead and SSH into our server, root at jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. All right, and as usual, the first thing we'll do is a quick apt update and an apt full upgrade to make sure our server is up to date before we start doing anything with it. And now that that's finished, we will go ahead and start setting up Jitsi. The first thing we need to do is confirm that the host name we entered in DigitalOcean has been applied. If you're setting up your own server at home, you'll need to do that manually. If we take a look at our /etc/hostname file, host name, you can see the host name that's currently showing is just Jitsi, and we could also already see that from our prompt here. It doesn't say jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com, it just says Jitsi. However, if we run the command DNS domain name, you can see that says nerdonthestreet.com. And if we do DNS domain name --F for fully qualified domain name, we get jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. And if we take a look at our etc hosts file, you can see that jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com has been added along with just Jitsi to point to one of our loopback addresses. So basically, the server is smart enough to know that the domain is nerdonthestreet.com, the host is Jitsi, so the fully qualified domain name is jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com, and that's good enough for what we're doing today. The Jitsi application will be happy with that. So we need to install some prerequisites. There are only two things we need to install here that will not get pulled in later when we actually install the Jitsi package. The first one is GNU-PG, which we'll use to import the key that the Jitsi packages are signed with. And then the second one is apt transport HTTPS. Once again, that is going to let us download the package over HTTPS when we go to do that in a moment. So now that that's done, we can go ahead and add the Jitsi repository. I'll go ahead and throw up a page on the Nerd on the Street wiki with these specific commands. You can also find them in the Jitsi documentation. Right now, we're just echoing in our Jitsi repository line into a new file under our sources.list.d. So we'll run that. Here's where we need to download Jitsi's public key from their website and import it into our package manager. And that is done. And we'll do another apt update, and this time you can see we are fetching or getting our package lists from the Jitsi repository. Now that that's done, the installation itself is fairly straightforward. We can just do an apt install jitsi-meet, And that's going to pull in a number of dependencies, as you can see. Now, if you're already using either Apache or Nginx on your server, the installation script that's going to run will automatically configure a virtual host in either of those two web servers. If you don't have Nginx or Apache already set up, the default is for Jitsi to pull in Nginx and to set itself up with that. Since this server is only going to be used for Jitsi and Nginx is really good for real-time stuff like video conferencing, we'll go ahead and stick with that, and we'll let it pull in all of these packages. We are going to be asked what our host name is. So the Jitsi documentation says your host name does really need to be set in your host name file in your etc hosts file like we looked at, but we do still need to enter it here as well for the Jitsi configuration files. We will enter in jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com since that is the domain name that I'm using. And here we're going to choose to generate a new self-signed certificate which will temporarily be used for this server. Now we do need to get a publicly usable SSL certificate in order for Jitsi Meet to work properly. A self-signed certificate is not going to be sufficient for using all of Jitsi's features, but as you can see here, we are just going to generate a self-signed certificate for use during the installation, and then we will have the opportunity later to automatically grab a Let's Encrypt certificate. So we'll hit enter on that. All right, and once that is finished, you can see near the end of the post installation script for Jitsi, they actually give us the command right here that we can run in order to generate a Let's Encrypt certificate. So I'm just going to copy that command, paste it right back in here, and we'll run that. We'll enter in our email address. And as you can see, certbot is currently being installed, and it's going to run automatically based on the email address that I put into the Jitsi script there and the Jitsi configuration. All right, and that is finished as well. You can see our normal Let's Encrypt finishing message. Now at this point, that's actually all we needed to do to just get a public Jitsi Meet server up and running. Now I'm running this on a public DigitalOcean server, so I've got a public IP address that the server is directly configured with. If I do an IPA, you can see my inet address here is the address that I pointed that domain name to in the DNS control panel earlier. However, if you're running this at home and you're using a router to perform network address translation, or NAT, you will need to forward ports TCP443 and UDP 10,000 from your public IP address to your private IP address. And then you'll need to go into this configuration file right here, etc jitsi video bridge sip communicator.properties. There are two options that you'll need to add in here if you're using network address translation, and those options look like this. The first one is our NAT harvester local address, so that's going to be your private IP address. And then the second one is our public address, which is obviously the internet-wide address that you pointed your DNS to. So I'm not going to save this file since I'm not doing that, but I wanted to mention it in case you're running one of these at home. So Jitsi Meet is running on our server right now. If we do a systemctl status, we can take a look and see a couple of the services that are running. So we've got Nginx, the web server, obviously running. Prosody is the XMPP server, which is used for the authentication and user management. We've got Jacofo here, which is the Jitsi Conference Focus service, and that supports some of the auxiliary functions of Jitsi. And then we've got Jitsi Video Bridge 2 service, which is the actual video conferencing portion itself. You can see both of these Jitsi services are Java processes. So since that's running, we can come to our web browser, and if I open a new tab, and we go to jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com, we've got a Jitsi start page here. We can name our meeting anything we want. So I'm going to name the first one here Test 1, and I'll click Go. That's going to load us into Jitsi. Your web browser will ask you for your permission to use your microphone and camera. I'll allow that here. And I think my particular web browser is blocking autoplay for my video. I'll turn that on. And now you can see me here. The web browser I'm using right now is Brave, so depending on if you're using Chromium or Firefox or whatever other browser, the process to allow your camera will look slightly different. But now that we're in here, this is what a Jitsi conference is going to look like. We're going to have our list of participants on the right side once more people join. Now on the bottom right here, we can open up our settings, and you can select your camera that you're using and your microphone input. Under profile here, we can set our display name, and we can also set an email address for our user, so it's going to use that to pull in a profile picture from Gravatar. And if you need to change your language, you can do that under the More section. So at this point, I could send this link, jitsi.nerdofthestreet.com/test1, to anybody, and anybody would be able to visit this link and join my video conference. I can apply a password to it in the bottom right here. If I click add password, I can type something in, and then people will need to know the password before they can join. So if you're happy with that setup, you can stop right here. That's all the setup that's required to get Jitsi actually running. However, you might have noticed one quirk about this process to start a video conference so far. That was that I didn't need to enter a password at any point to actually start the video conference. I can set a password now that the conference is started, but anybody right now could go to jitsi.nerdofthestreet.com and they could use my server to make their own conference and talk with their friends. Now that might not be an issue, however, if a lot of people start using your server, or if somebody really wanted to create a bot to go and create a ton of conference rooms on your Jitsi server, that might overload your server and it might go down, or at least decrease the performance for the conferences that you actually care about. So what we can do is we can set up authentication in Jitsi so that you have to log in with a username and password before you can start a conference. So in order to do that, I'm going to open up my terminal again, and we're going to nano into etc prosody. Like I mentioned, that's the XMPP server that is going to handle our authentication. Conf.avail jitsi.nerdofthestreet.com.config.lua. So this is a file, and we're going to go into it. Down here under authentication, you can see by default it's set to anonymous. We are going to change that to internal_plain. So I'll save that. We're also going to nano into etc jitsi jacofo/sip-communicator.properties. Now, the SIP communicator has the ability, by the way, to interface with an actual SIP program and allow people to dial in with real phones into your conference. We're not going to set that up today. That is a feature that is available for the program, but the SIP communicator utility is still used, even if you're not using the external SIP functionality. So inside of this file, we are going to add this new line of configuration, org.jitsi.jacofo.auth URL. Is going to be XMPP jitsi.nerdofthestreet.com. So the current server, we're just setting up a local server for authentication. So we'll save that, and then we're going to restart our three services. So I'm going to do a systemctl restart prosody, systemctl restart Jacofo, and systemctl restart Jitsi video bridge 2. After doing that, if I open up my web browser again, you can see we were disconnected from our test room there. And if I go to jitsi.nerdofthestreet.com, I'll go ahead and try to make test 2. But this time, before the meeting actually starts, it tells me a password's required. If I just enter in random text here, it doesn't work. It says incorrect username and password. So you need to log in with your account on the Jitsi server before you can start a conference now, which is great. Now, there's no sign up link here, so how do you make an account on the Jitsi server? Well, right now, the way that you do that is we open up our terminal again, and we run prosody_ctl register. Now, if you have an existing XMPP chat solution set up, you might already have a web interface or another way for these accounts to get created. But if you're just setting up a standalone Jitsi server, this is the easiest way to do it, is just create your accounts on the command line. So we're going to register an account with a username, Jacob, and then we're going to put a space and then the host that we're registering it on, which is jitsi.nerdofthestreet.com. And then we'll make my password here password. We'll run that. Now, if I come back to my test room here and I try and log in, I can either type Jacob or I can type Jacob at jitsi.nerdofthestreet.com, since that's the host that we registered on. I type my password in here, and that time it worked. It authenticated successfully, and I am in my new test room. Now, not everyone's going to be video conferencing from their computers. I certainly would. If I was going to join a video conference for pretty much anything, I would use a computer. And this is super easy because it's in a web browser. You don't need to install anything because it runs over WebRTC, which is really awesome. However, some people are going to want to join from their phones. A lot of casual users are going to want to join from their phones. And so I'm going to start recording here on my Android phone, and I'm going to show you what the process looks like to join one of these chats. So I'm going to open up the Jitsi Meet app that I've already downloaded from Google Play. It is free. You can just go download it. And it's going to ask me to enter a room name. Now, by default, the Jitsi Meet app is going to be joining the meet.jit.c public server. In order to change it to join my private server, I need to open up my settings on the left side, go to the settings section here, and under server URL, I'm going to enter in https://jitsi.nerdofthestreet.com. So once that's been entered in, I'll go back. I'm going to enter in the name of my room, which was test 2 here. and I'll click create/join. Now, I'll allow my audio and camera here for the app, and because we just set up authentication, as you can see, now, by default, everybody needs to sign in. Before you can create a conference or before you can join a conference, you need to sign in with an XMPP account that's been registered on the server. So I can type in Jacob at, actually, I'll just stick with Jacob to demonstrate that it works either way. And I'll type in my password here. I'll click OK, and we're connecting. And after a moment, it connects. And now I can see myself on the phone. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself on both of these so that the audio is not echoing. But as you can see, I can see my phone's camera. I can change the orientation to landscape there. So now it's like I'm, holding my phone and talking to somebody through my phone's camera. And then on my phone, I can see my webcam. And you can see it's kind of difficult to demonstrate. I'm doing this as one person. I'm going through all this work to set up a video conferencing server, but I don't actually have anybody to talk to. But that is working now. I'm going to hang up on the phone. And so right now, anybody who's going to join one of my conferences also needs to sign in with an account. So if I was just using this, say, for Nerd on the Street, a very small group, maybe less than 10 people who would be using this, I could go through and I could just run this prosody_ctl command to create an account for everyone, tell them all what their password is. However, if you're using this with family or friends who are not technical, you might not want to have to log in order to join a conference. Probably the most common configuration you're going to want is requiring a login to create a conference, but not requiring a login to join a conference. And we're only one step away from having that accomplished. So we can go ahead and minimize Jitsi again, open up our terminal. And in order to allow anonymous joining of conferences, all we need to do is nano into our prosody configuration file one more time. At the bottom of this file, we're going to add a new section. This is going to be a virtual host section for guest.jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. And authentication is going to say anonymous. Encryption is not required for authentication because there is no password to encrypt. Now the server is running on Nginx, and Nginx doesn't technically have virtual hosts. That's an Apache concept. But right now we're in our prosody configuration, and this guest.jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com address is only used in configuration. We don't actually need this full domain name to resolve out. You can see up here we've got auth.jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. I didn't add auth.jitsi to my DNS. I've only got Jitsi added in my DNS control panel. So these additional subdomains are only for configuration purposes, so we can save that file. We are also going to nano into the actual Jitsi Meet configuration at Etsy Jitsi Meet jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com-config.js. And right underneath this domain line at the top here, this tells us what our XMPP domain is. So for authentication, we're using jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. Underneath that, we've got in our example config right here, anonymous domain, and that's the option we want to set. And we will set that to guest.jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. So we'll save that. We will restart our three services one more time. So systemctl restart prosody, restart Jacofo, and we will restart Jitsi Video Bridge 2. And after restarting all of those, we will go through this process one more time here. In our web browser, we go to jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. We're going to start a meeting. We'll just call this one group chat. After we start that meeting, it's going to ask me to authenticate. I am the host, so I'll click this button and enter in my username and password. So once again, we are requiring an account in order to start a conference because we don't want anybody to be able to use our server. So we'll hit enter, and that's going to work. Now we've got our conference. However, I don't want my family and friends to actually have to register accounts on my server on the command line. So once we're in here, I'm actually going to set a password in the bottom right. I'm going to click add password. The password's going to be easy to share password. All right, so now I can tell my friends to go and join jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com/group chat and to enter in the password easy to share password. We're going to come back to my phone here, and I'm going to go into my settings and my apps, and I'm just going to clear my data for the Jitsi Meet application so that we can demonstrate that you don't need to sign in. So the data has been cleared. I'm going to open up Jitsi Meet again. And so once again, I'll go to my settings, and somebody using this for the first time will have to type in my Jitsi Meet URL, which is jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com. And once that's typed in, I'll come back here. I'll enter in my room name, which is group chat. And when I go to join it this time we won't be asked to enter in a username and password. This time it's just a password, so that's our easy to share password. And I'll click OK. And in a couple of seconds, I have now joined the meeting again. All right, so I know this was probably a lot to process. I basically showed you 3 different configurations for Jitsi. The recording's at about 45 minutes right now, but it doesn't actually take that long to set things up how you want. If you want a public server, you can just do the first half of the video, and then you've got a public Jitsi server, so you don't have to use Zoom. If you want to secure your server so that only registered users can start conferences, and then you want to go all the way and make it easy for more people to join, it's just a few more lines of configuration like I just showed you. And at this point, I could even come here and I can remove the password from this room. Let's say I didn't want somebody to have to enter a password at all. With our final configuration, I can remove the password and I can just send out the link, jitsi.nerdonthestreet.com/group chat. And now that that password has been cleared, if I come into my settings one more time, I'm going to clear my Jitsi Meet storage again so that we know that that password isn't saved. I can come into Jitsi Meet. It's got default settings again. Now I can enter in my room name, group, chat, and when I go to enter in there, I'll allow my permissions on my Android device, and I did not have to enter a password that time, it just started. So if you're stuck inside because of the coronavirus pandemic, maybe you've got more free time than usual because you don't have to commute to work right now, instead of using a proprietary solution like Zoom, where you're giving a company access to the entirety of your video chat, you're using a non-standard encryption scheme that is not even end-to-end, and not having control over where your data is going physically. Instead of doing that, I would highly recommend take a few minutes, set up your own Jitsi Meet server, or, gather with your friends and decide who's going to set up the Jitsi Meet server, and set one up and use that instead because it's open source, it's free, you'll get a little bit of experience setting the server up, and now you can chat with people on your own server where you control 100% of the data. So I hope this was helpful to somebody out there. If you have any questions while setting this up, feel free to ask at the Nerd on the Street forums at nerdonthestreet.com. But aside from that, that's all I had to show you this weekend. So I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the Nerd on the Street, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.